and I started getting into this historical interest with the storyline about Jasmine being brought up in post-dissolution India. And I found out that I had to know a considerable amount of stuff about what her life would have been like, because it's tip of the iceberg stuff. Or actually, it's the iceberg. The reader sees the tip, and what I had to know was the beneath the surface about what made her who she was and relate to people the way she did when she came to live in England.
Is it not true that so much of the research that you wind up doing never appears in the book?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And maybe we can talk about that a little bit later when we get to the new book.
To your new book,
yes.
Just to say goodbye.
Yeah.
Well, moving right along then, let's talk about briefly, your fourth book was Mourn Not You're Dead, and it is set Surrey?
Mm-hmm.
And this is an interesting book because here you have actually taken a senior policeman, a police commander, and murdered him. And so the question arises inevitably, is this a personal kill or is this a professional kill? You know, did someone from policing nail him, or is it something to do with him as a human being? Which I think always must be a fascinating question when you have someone in that position, you know, where a crime could come from either side.
Well, I think he's probably the least sympathetic of my victims. I tend to sort of go the other way. I like for the reader to be emotionally invested in the victim, because I think otherwise they don't have as much interest or stake in who killed the person and why. But Alistair Gilbert was an interesting character. I sort of like the idea of the man who appeared to be as successful and perfect as he did, and was not for many reasons. It's all this sort of beneath the surface.
Well, I agree with you, and I think that certainly was always a weakness in the Christie books, is that, you know, everybody loathed. I mean, she was so busy populating all the suspects with motives that it was very difficult to care anything about the villain. I mean, he was almost always, or she, somebody whose hand was held up, waiting to be murdered, and then it was just a question of which was the most compelling reason. And I agree. In your fifth book, Dreaming of the Bones, which I think touch chords in people that really reverberate. One of my students wrote an interesting paper to the effect that, having come into this was the first of your books, number 5, that the student was reading, that he thought that the person who becomes the first victim, which is to say Kincaid's ex-wife, was actually the lead character. He was so surprised because he thought, you know, wait a minute, we've just lost the sleuth. Where are we going with this book? You know, we're only on page whatever. And I do think that you succeeded so well in making Vic a sympathetic character and part of the story, that when she was murdered, everybody went, whoops.
That was a very difficult thing to do. I actually reached a point in that book where I wasn't sure I could write it.
Why so?
Because I was very emotionally invested in the character. I think that, you know, there's probably a good deal of autobiographical components in that particular character, and you know, just she was very sympathetic for many reasons, and I reached the point where I just thought, I'm not sure that I can actually make myself do this. And
kill her?
Yeah, and I had to go and just sort of moan and think about it for a couple of weeks, and came to the obvious realization that if I didn't, I had no book.
And contracts were merging.
And contracts.
Well, it is very powerful. I had a definite, you know.
And I actually had to go away from home for about a week, because it was such an emotionally intense thing that I, you know, just couldn't deal with my family very well and write at the same time. So.
Well, it's a very powerful book on many levels. I think that it is, it's a bigger book in a number of senses. You've got 3 timelines, 2 essentially ones, but you've essential ones. You've got Rupert Brooke and his life back around the
teens,
First World War.
Just before the First World War.
And of course we all know of the coming loss and the coming war, which is, it's my least favorite war because absolutely nothing constructive happened.
No, nothing good came out of it at all.
No, I mean, it was a war of complete futility fought over a few yards of France, and well, that's being unfair, but nonetheless, it's a terrible war. And then you have Lydia Brooke, potentially, well, whether his namesake or not, anyway, a poet, in the 1960s, and that whole neo-pagan.
Cambridge in the 60s, which was fascinating.
Absolutely. And then you've got the current.
Yeah.
You've got Cambridge in the 1990s, and to what degree these two earlier times have propelled a modern murderer into crime. And so you're working in these different timelines with different points of view and all these things going on. And it's a very complex book.
It was a very ambitious book, and when I conceived it, I honestly had great trepidation over whether or not I could pull it off. But you know, if you're not challenged, if you don't keep trying to do things that you haven't done before as a writer, I think that not only would you get bored with it, but your readers would probably get bored with it too. But it was a scary thing.
Well, you brought it up extremely well, and you were nominated for an avalanche of mystery awards by delighted readers, and you won the McCavity Award, and you won the Gibson Award.
Yes, I did. I am most proud of the Gibson Award.
My mother, who is our tough store critic, we are a 3-generation operation, and Mother really is a marvelous reader and was just enamored with this book, and I was delighted when she gave it her annual award. Thought it was more so than you may realize, a real tribute. But
well, I thought so.
Well, very nice of you. I know that you are in Cambridge with this book, that you actually lived there for a little while you were writing the book. And it's interesting because Cambridge does not seem to receive as much attention as Oxford.
No.
In terms of crime novels, and yet it's such an interesting city. And it made me remember a wonderful occasion when you and I were together at a mystery conference in Oxford at St. Hilda's College. And you were, as you remind me, at the head table, and I was in the audience. But we did have an evening where we all assembled in the dining hall at Somerville
College, which was Dorothy Sayers College. And P.D. James was the guest of honor and was sitting and speaking at the head table.
Addressing, in fact, the whole question of Dorothy Sayers as
yeah.
a crime writer. But what was really funny, and the backstory was that P.D. James had come to Scottsdale in 1995, and in fact was the very first guest on this program, The Criminal Calendar, and said to me then, with prescient, well, she was being prescient, and she said that no machine was ever user-friendly to her, and that includes audio systems, sound systems, because we had a major problem with the sound system while she was here. And bearing that in mind, when we got to Somerville College, and I knew she was going to do the after-dinner
She was
address.
actually reading a quite well-prepared academic paper, and I have to say that this was a pinnacle for me to be having dinner at Dorothy Sayers College and sitting at the head table with P.D. James, which I had been invited to do because I was one of the guest speakers that year. And so, it was such a thrill. And I'm sitting up there after dinner, and Baroness James, as she is now, began to read her paper, and her mic apparently was not functioning. And I'm sitting at the head table, and Barbara can't see because she's facing the head table, but nobody in the audience can understand a word she's saying, and she's reading. She's not projecting out to the audience, and I can see everybody in the audience sitting there and starting to droop.
Except for me, who had the wit, knowing our past history, to put myself right in front of her. Yeah. Yes, because I just knew that something terrible was going to happen again. And there were 4 of us, your friend Catherine and myself and 2 others, I can't remember what, who had formed a little group right in front of her, so we knew what was going on. But it was a wonderful occasion. Lord, a crime writer's and a crime reader's dream to be.
It was heaven for a crime writer, and especially for this one. I had been a tremendous fan of both Sayers and P.D. James. Had been very much influenced by P.D. James' early books, and I would never attempt to try to reach the standards of either of them, but it was certainly an honor
It was
to
wonderful.
be in that company.
A shared experience.